Welcome to the Encore Audio Archives YouTube channel. I'm Taper Dave, and this is my channel. I've uploaded hundreds of talks here that I've recorded at meetings in West LA, and I've also recorded conventions starting in 2013. I've got a bunch of those up. And Walt and Mary Murray, the original owners of Encore Audio Archives, started the company in the 80s, and Walt recorded Joe and Charlie's and a bunch of stuff down in Vista, California. My sobriety date is June 20th of 1994. I hope you find something you like, so please like and subscribe to my channel and comment down below. If you want to hear something that I don't have or that you don't see, I'll see that I get it. Anyways, take care and have a great day if you want to.
My name is Lyle and I'm an alcoholic. I thought maybe for a minute I was going to have to get up here and introduce Robert. You know, it was just mentioned earlier by one of the speakers this morning, Rick, I think it was, about our laughter. And we just did it. And what a gift that is, a golden, precious, treasured gift. Because none of us were laughing when we got here. I've never seen anybody come here that was laughing. And there was a Pulitzer Prize winning writer back in the 50s and 60s by the name of Fulton Oursler. And he wrote an article about alcoholics. And he talked about our laughter. He says, we laugh at ghoulish things, the things that most normal people would cringe at. But he says, in their case, it represents the very height of self-conquest. And that's one of the things we get when we come here. Before I go any farther, anytime I'm at one of these conferences and we have ladies or people who are interpreting through the American Sign Language, I always like to acknowledge them. And we have Courtney and Katie here, and they're the two hardest working people in the room tonight. I also do that so that you'll know that as I'm watching them, it's because if they get ahead of me, I will have to hustle to catch up. My home group is a Stockbridge group, Stockbridge, Georgia. My sobriety date is March the 7th of 1990. It says on my tag here, Atlanta. Last night, Maury and Rick and I were laughing at how you guys had spelled it for them as Toronto instead of Toronto. It reminded me that several years ago, I went to 2 or 3 conferences in a row, and they had mistaken my locale. Now, it didn't bother me because I was sober. I knew where I lived, but I show up there one time, it said Stonebridge, Georgia. Show up the next time, it said Stockton, Georgia. I went to England, and they had Stockingbridge, Georgia. And the Brits were fascinated with that. And they said, where is Stockingbridge, Georgia? I said, it's just across the state line from Pantyhose, Alabama. Now, we just did a countdown, and we've got some new folks here in AA. So my job tonight is to welcome you to Alcoholics Anonymous. If you're kind of dazed and wondering why you're here, you're in the right place. We all were at one point in time. One of the things that crosses my mind on these occasions is that our stories from the podium at every conference that I have ever been to are widely diverse. Facts and circumstances are all over the place. I've been sober 27 years, and I can still sit in the audience and say, I didn't do that. I didn't drink like that. That didn't happen to me. And it's easy for me, even at this point in time, to find the differences instead of the similarities. However, And I say that because if you're new and you're looking for a way out, we'll give it to you. I mean, it's easy to sit up there and go, I didn't do that, I didn't do that, I didn't do that. But here's the deal for me. I listen to the speakers and I watch the speakers. I don't care who they are. I don't care if they're red, white, yellow, black, young, old, male, female. As they go through this story, their personal story, I listen and I watch what happened to them. I watch what alcoholism did to them. And I relate. I relate to the feelings, the loss, the shame, the devastation, the dishonor, the degradation, the horror, the terror, the fear. And then I listen what happens when they come here, and if they stay here, I listen to the upswing of what recovery does. Stacy's story last night was one of the more remarkable, but I get to hear those. You come out of nowhere. You got nothing. And the next thing you know, you're walking across the college stage with a diploma, then a master's, then a PhD. I love those stories. And I know those things happen on the outside in the non-alcoholic world, but it's only when I come here that I hear those stories with a great, almost routine consistency that we get to experience the miracles. I loved it when she said last night, where do you matriculate from? Alcoholics Anonymous. And so it is, and so it is. And if you stay with us, you'll get to experience that too, even though it doesn't seem like it at times. We're supposed to talk about, in a general way, what we were like, what happened, and what we're like now. And I used to say what it was like. And I still don't think that's a major faux pas or big deal, although I know some people do. And I got a very cryptic email from a guy who identified himself in Southwest Georgia as an old-timer. And he said, I'm listening to one of your CDs with some newcomers here, and you're misquoting the Big Book. I don't quote the Big Book to begin with. I don't have that gift. Some people do. I don't. Although once in a while, just for the heck of it, I'll tell you, you'll look on the page, top of the page, 132, second paragraph. You know, you'll see, I have no idea what's there. I just know you'll go look. And but I don't quote the Big Book. But he says, you're saying what it was like instead of what we were like. And I thought, oh, come on, really? Is it worth all this? But I put my AA face on and sent him back an email and said, well, excuse me, I'm sorry, I'll try to do better. And apparently that lacked the ring of sincerity he was after. And so I get a second email back, and he says, well, it's really important because he said, if some of us old-timers were sitting in the front row, and you started that way, we might just very well get up and walk out, thinking that if you're going to start by misquoting the Big Book, the rest of the story can't be that good. And about that time, I took my AA face off, and up popped my competitive spirit, and so I sent him another email and said, well, if that happened, I don't think I'd burst into tears at the podium. Probably wouldn't rush out to get a drink. I said, let me remind you, as long as this seems to be a continuing topic of discussion, that it does not say, when we read How It Works, it does not say, rarely have we seen a person fail who has thoroughly memorized the book. And I didn't get any more emails from him. But AA has its own way of working things out. About 2 or 3 years later, I'm asked to speak at the Flint River Roundup, and he was my host. So I'm going to start with what happened, because it was a big deal. It was a really, really big deal. My sobriety date is March the 7th, and March 8th and 9th will also play a large part in this story tonight. 3 intense days that roll around every year, and they're like 3 days of the Kennedy assassination. I can look at my watch, and I remember intensely, vividly, what was taking place on every one of those 3 days. Those 3 days just passed not long ago, and the same thing happened again this year. And I don't know how much of the intensity has waned, maybe some, but not a lot. And I never, ever want to relive 3 days like those 3 days. I had my last drinks on March the 7th, 1990, in a place in Fargo, North Dakota, called the Speakeasy Bar and Grill. On March the 8th, early in the morning, an event took place that captured the national media's attention. And that is that an airline crew with 3 pilots were arrested for having flown from the Fargo Airport to the Minneapolis-St. Paul International Airport. They were arrested upon landing for having flown under the influence, and I was the captain of that flight crew. Interestingly, that has happened a number of times since 1990, and it has become old hat news. See a pilot in the paper or on TV being arrested for going through TSA and smelling like alcohol. Day 2, you don't see any mention of him. But I was the very first pilot ever arrested, tried, convicted, sentenced, and sent to federal prison as a result of flying a commercial airliner under the influence of alcohol. And it was a huge, huge story. And it stayed on the media as the lead story for weeks into months, and I thought it would never, ever, ever go away. I was detained for 12 hours that day, March the 8th, and it was a surreal day because this wasn't supposed to happen to me. This is not who I am. It is not the way I have lived my life, and I didn't think I was destined to have something like this happen to me. But I'm an alcoholic. And at some point in time, I lose the ability to call the shots. I can no longer manage my life. And I remember at 12 hours sitting there looking around, having almost an out-of-body experience, thinking, this cannot be happening to me. This can't be happening to me. And the flip part of that would happen, and I'd look around and think, it is. It's happening to me. It's happening right now. And I would have to fight hard not to throw up, not to get sick. Northwest Airlines at that time was the only major carrier that didn't have a program for alcoholic pilots. A program called the HIMSS program came into place in the mid-'70s, and all the other major carriers embraced that program and were highly successful with it, but Northwest had resisted that and refused to join the industry. And every few years, I would watch a pilot get in difficulty on a layover, and if that difficulty reached the company's attention and involved alcohol, the outcome was always the same. It was swift, it was irrevocable, that pilot was terminated, and that story ripped through the airline among the pilots and flight attendants like wildfire. And I had a list, as we all probably did up here, my little hall of shame, of the names of those pilots and the locales and the details as best we had heard. And one of the thoughts that I had that day, among the millions of tumbling thoughts, was that's my legacy. That's where my name goes. That's how I leave this airline, with my name on that list. Wasn't who I was. It wasn't what I had ever done. It had never been who I was. But it happened. And it happened because I'm an alcoholic. I did not know at that time, as we went to 2 different facilities and gave blood, that the second facility, there was a reporter who saw 2 uniformed police officers escorting 3 uniformed airline pilots and thought there might be a story there, and that's how it broke to the public. It was an insurmountable concept to me that I could survive the shame and the stigma and the disgrace of having my peers at the airline know about it. I had no earthly idea that this was about to go all over the United States, Canada, into Asia, and into Europe. I had no idea that was coming. We were released late that evening I had given a sworn statement, deposition to one of the company attorneys, and I knew that my life was over. I knew it was gone. I got home, or I got to a commuter apartment that evening and thought for the first time that day, oh my God, I was supposed to be home tonight. I was supposed to be home at the Atlanta airport. My wife Barbara had waited out there for 4 hours for me to show up. And I called the house and she was still not home, and I left a very dispirited message that there'd been a disaster. I thought I'd lost my job. I'd be home the first flight in the morning. I don't know why she didn't call me back, having received a call like that, but what a gift that was. I saw it later because I was so sick at heart that I did not want to talk about this. I got home, spent a sleepless night. Got home the next morning early. Knew I'd never wear that uniform again. Knew I would never fly again. Exited the airport as quickly as I could because I knew all the people out there used to laugh and joke and talk with them, the agents, the mechanics, the baggage handlers, the groomers. I didn't want anybody to see me or stop me or speak to me. I've never told the story, but what I haven't said that I got to the front of the airport and I saw Barbara parked off to the right, and I felt like I had to climb over the curb to get in the car with her. She and I had been married a long time, and I was so ashamed I couldn't even look at her. We pulled away from the curb, and all I could say was, honey, I'm so sorry. She has a very soft South Texas voice. She said, who better than I might possibly understand how you feel right now? We drove home in silence. Again, another gift that I didn't really see until a little while later. When I thought to myself, she had every right to ask her husband, who had just trashed a 22-year golden career as an airline captain. You've seen this before. You knew the Northwest policy. Why did you stay and drink? Why didn't you go back to your hotel room? I didn't have an answer for any of those questions. I want to say something here right now, that most of the time the speakers come and go from the podium. We don't know what they did for a living, and that's as it should be. So the fact that I'm talking about being an airline pilot is in the context of the story itself and only for that purpose. Had I been anything other than that, none of this would have occurred. The media wouldn't have been on it. It wouldn't have been a big deal. And I wouldn't have set myself up for a federal felony conviction. So it's in the context of the story only. I don't believe we have any status in this fellowship. I've always felt that way. I don't care who you are. I've met Fortune 500 CEOs that are in this program, wealthy people, people of prestige, world-famous people. I happen to think that the only level of prestige any of us ever aspire to and possibly attain is that called sobriety. And that's the thing that keeps every one of us right here, that makes me the same as you and you the same as me, and creates this incredible fabric of support in this AA fellowship. That's the only thing we're after. So I don't attach any meaningful significance to the fact that I was an airline pilot, except for the fact that I was blessed to have been able to do that. We got home and Barbara left and went to work, and I did not want to be alone. I couldn't stay in my own skin. And I walked in the house, and moments later, I called the only person I knew to call, who was a doctor, but he wasn't a regular doctor. He was a PhD family therapist, who will get in the story shortly. And I said, there's been an emergency I need to declare, and I need to see you right away. He said, come straight in. I'll clear the calendar. I went over to his office. I can see it just as vividly now as I did then. I saw the office layout, and I walked in, and the good thing about what had happened to me was this was it for me. I was done. I was completely, totally, utterly destroyed, devastated, shredded by what had happened to me. And so I told him straight out what had happened. He recoiled a little bit with some shock and stunned surprise, and he said, God, Lyle, he said, this is horrible. He said, this is absolutely horrible. This is now March the 9th. It's a Friday. And I'm going to hear two comments that day that I could not mentally process. And I heard the first one now, because he started around his desk, and he stopped, and he turned and looked at me, and he said, maybe this is what had to happen. And I had no idea why he would say that to me. I didn't know why he would say such a thing to me, where it fit or how it fit. and I didn't respond. And he came back a few minutes later, and he said, I want you to go see another doctor tonight. I've got an appointment for you at 6 o'clock tonight on the other side of Atlanta. He's a very prominent psychiatrist. He's also a recovering alcoholic and cocaine addict, and he's certified in addiction medicine, which I had never, ever heard of. Even in the condition I was, I picked up on the 6 o'clock appointment time on a Friday. I knew doctors don't normally do that. Later, this same doctor told me, he said, based on your appearance, he said, I was so afraid you were a suicide. And he said it was imperative that you get to see this doctor immediately. I don't know what I looked like or sounded like, but I can tell you it didn't take long before dark thoughts started to intrude. And I've always thought I was a little too tough for that, a little too resilient. We went over to this man's office. I have no memory of that meeting. I hadn't had anything to eat or drink for 2 days. It's just like an alcoholic blackout. And at some point in time, I told him everything I knew as honestly as I could. He looked at me and said, Lyle, you're an alcoholic. You need to get into treatment tonight. It was significant that I had no reaction to that because I've hated alcoholics my entire life. I have 2 parents who are alcoholics and died from this disease. I saw what it did to my family. I grew up in a native community. I saw what it did there. I flew around the cities of the United States and I saw alcoholics, alleyways, doorways, dirty, disheveled, brown paper bags, passed out on the park benches and on the grass. And those were alcoholics. And that was my picture of an alcoholic. In the 24 hours since the arrest, in a way I'll never fully understand, all the dots got connected, way down deep, and I knew I was that thing I hated. I knew I was that thing that I swore I would never be. So when he told me that, I didn't recoil. And I said to him, I thought you would probably tell me that. And I said, I'm okay with it. But I said, I just got home today. And I said, please let me go home. I said, look for Barbara to just hang on to me and let my mind uncoil. Let me just absorb what's happened to me, and then I'll go into treatment. He said, you need to go into treatment tonight. And I paused and took a breath, and I said, okay. We turned around, following another set of directions, back across Atlanta to a treatment center with the clothes on my back. We made the final turn, and there was a sign there, and the lights hit the sign, and I hit the brakes and stopped the sign directly in front of me. Sign said Anchor Hospital, a hospital for alcoholism and other chemical dependencies. And it was like somebody just stabbed me in the guts. And I thought, I'm 51. This is how my life ends, in a treatment center for alcoholics. The last place on earth I thought I would ever see. And I'm going in there tonight. What happened? What happened? And I had a little brief mini flashback over the course of my life. And I had some pretty neat accomplishments, big things that I thought gave me stature and definition and meaning. And it was almost like somebody erased them, and I wasn't sure they'd ever existed. And I sat there without any value as a human being, none. I counted for nothing, no self-worth, no value. Some years later, I read a summarizing paragraph at the end of a long report written by one of the doctors. And it said, given the history and background of this man, it was unlikely to believe he would ever be a productive member of society. And I thought, wow, that is really dismal. And then I thought, I'm the one that gave him all the information. Let me tell you a couple of things. First of all, I'm not going to have time for a big drunk log. I've got one, and I could spend an hour up here talking about it. But I've got other things that I think are more important to get in there. I think it's important for identification purposes. And I just don't have a lot of time to go into a long drunkalogue. I got to AA in 1975, sentenced by a judge because I had a second DWI. Don't count that as an attempt to stay sober because I hated AA. I hated the people in it. I couldn't wait to get out of the meeting, go home and get a drink. Tell my wife, that's the most effed up bunch of people I have ever seen in my life. Man, they lose their homes, their cars, their wives, their jobs, and they can't figure this out. For Christ's sake, let's have a drink. I mentioned the DWI. Had two of them. One of my favorite things that I always remember about DWI is I got a good Indian buddy. He said, I was in court for my 6th DWI before I learned that that didn't stand for drinking with Indians. I released the brakes and started down the hill in the treatment center. And for the first time that day, it occurred to me, this is March the 9th. This is my 27th wedding anniversary. And I said, very defeatedly, hell of a way to spend an anniversary, huh? I then heard the second statement that I couldn't process, very softly. Barbara said, might be the best one we ever had. I was grateful for her attitude, but I couldn't fathom that comment. I knew better than anyone did that my life was over. No one had ever come back from anything like this, not at Northwest. And their situations had not been even 10% as bad as mine was and was going to get. I knew that I was through flying, my life was over, and it would never be retrievable. I'd like to stop at this point and mention that a few years ago, March the 9th rolled around. It was a gorgeous Georgia morning, and up the driveway came one of my sponsees, and we live out a little ways. I said, what are you doing here? And he said, it's March the 9th. I've heard the story. I just want to come by and wish you and Barbara a happy anniversary. And I thought, well, that's nice. And we went inside. Coffee was on, and Barbara's in there. And conversation's light and lively. And he says, wow, he says, what's the secret for having stayed married for so long? And she beat me to the punch. And she said, mostly due to the fact that I could never stand to admit I made a mistake. It's an ego-deflating program. If you're new here, it's not mandatory that you share that with your significant other. A couple of years ago, I was speaking at the Whitworth Women's Prison. I've been there a few times. And it's about a 3-hour drive from where I am. And women's prison is a unique experience. They don't look like you ladies do. They got oversized khaki scrubs, body piercings, tattoos, no makeup, the hair's going every which way. It's a pretty hard-looking bunch of gals. There's about 25 of them in the room, I guess. I'm starting into the story, and one of them yells out, "You're hot." I'd never had that happen before, and so it stopped me. And before I could recover, about 2 or 3 more yelled out, "Yeah, you're hot." And I finally got my legs back underneath me, and I finished the story, and Barbara's asleep by the time I get home. And the next morning we get up and we're having coffee, and I thought, this is probably something she should hear about. And, so I told her. And she takes a sip of her coffee and looks at me, and she says, "They must have been locked up a really long time." I just love it. Let me start and kind of fill in a little bit of stuff here and tell you that I was born in Wichita, Kansas. Grew up in Kansas and Oklahoma. I was born in Wichita on September 29th, 1938. So I'm 78 and a half. That's not a big deal, except it's a big number. Got here kind of fast. And I always tell you the age because I know I'm not the only one that likes to sit out there and guess the age of the speakers. And usually if I'm listening closely enough, there'll be a couple of dates and numbers thrown around. I can figure it out. But I've noticed that the ladies don't do that very much, and they throw out little stuff, Like I got out of college, and I'm thinking, well, she had to be 21, 22. Same year Kennedy was assassinated. I'm going 63, I think. And so I'm adding and subtracting. I had my first child when I was 25. It was 2 years after Neil Armstrong walked on the moon. I'm thinking, Jesus, that's 60. Was that 68 or 69? So I'm out there doing this work. And they walk off the stage, and I'm going, hell, I don't know, 43 or 69, I don't know, 69. Now, I think it was Maury. I'm not sure. I think it was Maury. And I were someplace, and she was doing her talk, and she says, I'm not going to tell you how old I am, but it was something about the age of Aquarius or something. And when that came out, I'm going, hell, I have no clue about that. So, at any rate, I grew up in a World War II housing project, a very economically depressed area. I think the term poor is very subjective. I've been on a number of reservations, and I wasn't poor in that same sense. So being poor is subjective, but we didn't have anything, and we were always behind, and everything we had was third rate. It was broken, secondhand, patched, wired, taped, whatever. And my parents were always struggling to stay alive and catch up. And it was a very diverse community, blacks, whites, Hispanics, Native American segment. I was part of the Native American segment. I'm an ethnic mix of several different things, but the two parts that really seemed to love to go to the bar with me to drink are the Irish and Comanche parts. And we don't get a chance to pick our parents, and so I was okay with that. Because I loved the Irish places. I knew where they were around the country, and I would change clothes in about 5 minutes after I got to the hotel. I'm at one of those places, on my way to one of those places. And I had all the albums, and I love those Irish freedom songs and drinking songs and rebel songs. And I would stay, and these would be real authentic Irish bands, and I wouldn't leave until the band was leaving. And then I loved that stuff, and then maybe the other side would kick in, the moons would line a different way, or a mood would be differently. And I would be in some place, I remember having a thought, this would be a good evening, just go have a couple of drinks and kill some white people. And I grew up in my native culture. I was a powwow guy. I knew the songs and the dances. I was a dancer, and was very culturally tied to that part of my ethnicity. And I couldn't help but think, after the arrest, that's one of the many things I've shamed. I was raised always to do my best. I talked about two parents who were alcoholics. I never go to the podium without thanking my parents, because they weren't drunk all the time, and before the alcohol killed them, they gave me some really good stuff, a good work ethic, some good values. And my job was to always, no matter what it was, no matter how menial, how meaningless it was, my job was always to do it to the best of my ability. And when I was done with it, leave it bright and shiny with a coat of dignity on it when I walked away from it. In the aftermath of my incident in Fargo, I shamed and destroyed everything that had any kind of meaningful value to me. My heritage, my family, my profession, my Marine Corps uniform, my airline uniform. I destroyed it all because I'm an alcoholic. I graduated from when I was 14, the parents, the family was completely destroyed from the inside out. My parents got a divorce. It really impacted me. And within 3 years, each of them had been married and divorced 2 more times, and I didn't get along well in blended families. I was always having difficulty with somebody and asked to go to the other family, and I'd do that for a while and go back. And that's the way I ricocheted through high school. And I had the ability to be a good student if I wanted to be, but nobody was watching. Nobody cared. I've got a sister who's 2 years younger than I am. We were on our own. And so I squandered a lot of academic opportunity that I could have had even in high school. I graduated when I was 17. Most of my friends married their little 18-year-old sweethearts and went to work in one of the aircraft factories that Wichita is known for. And I wasn't going to do that. I was thinking about joining the service, but I hadn't decided what. About that time, one of my buddies comes back from the Marine Corps right out of boot camp, And I was impressed. And he and I sat in a bar for about 3 hours, and I listened to boot camp stories about what, and these were brutal, cruel, sadistic stories of what Marine drill instructors do to their recruits. And I'm hanging on every word. I had just turned 18. And at the end of the afternoon, I thought, man, I just can't wait to go do that. Early sign of my thinking not being quite right. And within a couple of days, I'd signed on the lines, and off I went into Marine Corps boot camp. Once I got there, I loved it. Once I got over the shock of it, I loved it. It was extreme. Marine Corps boot camp, and I mean no disrespect to the other services, is not like the other branches of service. It just simply is not. And it was extreme, and it was intense, and it was competitive, and I loved it. And I experienced for the first time in my life that thing that the Marine Corps is so known for, that sense of camaraderie, that binding brotherhood, that one for all for one. I had never seen anything like that, and I loved it. And at the end of the 13 weeks, as we were coming up to graduate, there were 70 of us in this platoon. They called out 3 names of the 3 top guys. My name was the second name called. I was immensely proud. I had never achieved or accomplished anything like that, especially under those conditions and circumstances. And so 3 of us got a PFC stripe, a red bordered stripe. That's private first class. You cannot run the Marine Corps as a private first class. But I'll tell you what, I couldn't take my eyes off of that red bordered stripe. 67 of my buddies are still slick sleeve privates, and I've got that, and that means something. We go to Camp Pendleton. We immediately draw guard duty. It's raining. My buddies are outside with an M1 on their shoulders. I'm in the Quonset hut because I'm acting corporal of the guard because of my heavy rank. And I looked over in the corner, and I saw a first lieutenant's uniform. I saw the silver bar. And I sat there and looked at it, and I slid my chair back. And I thought, by God, I'm staying. This is where I belong. Because at the rate I'm going, General is not that far away. And I stayed and I excelled. One of the reasons I'm not going to do a drunkalogue is because everywhere I was in a hard drinking group. It was hard for me to pull away from the crowd. Eventually I did. This is a progressive disease. We don't all progress at the same rate. Eventually I pulled way away, but not for a good long while. I didn't know until I got into treatment what alcoholism, the disease, was. I thought it was very, very different because I compared behavior with regard to my parents and the other people I knew who were alcoholics. But when I got into treatment and they started talking about the symptoms of this disease, I had every one of them. Notably, when I start to drink, I'm not able to stop. That was not always the case. And the Big Book talks about this. It says at some point in time, we could have stopped. We could have controlled our drinking. But nobody wants to, and I certainly didn't. Nor did I have any of that knowledge. But I had every symptom that they had, and I didn't have anybody thumping me in the chest and saying, you're full of denial. I saw it. I laid there at night. I thought about it. I knew it. But for a long time, I thought I was just like everybody else. 4.5 years later, I came in. I got another meritorious promotion to Lance Corporal. I came walking in 4.5 years later. My commanding officer took me into the office, and he said, there's a brand new program out called Marine Aviation Cadet. You're the only guy in the unit whose entry scores are high enough that you might possibly qualify for that program if you'd like to go test for it. And I said I would. I went over and I tested. It was an all-day thing. I'd always wanted to fly, but flying was not ever anywhere on my real-life radar scope. The pilots I knew about had college educations, and they came from other parts of Wichita. They didn't come out of Plainview, and they didn't come out of a Native American segment, and they damn sure didn't come out of an alcoholic home. But he's laying an opportunity in front of me, and I want to take it. And I took the test and passed. And he said, the other thing you need to know is this is an 18-month program, and roughly 50% of the people don't make it. They wash out. The other thing you need to be very aware of is that you're coming in the back door because you got to test as an enlisted Marine. 99% of the people coming into this program will do so from the civilian side, and they've got to have 2 years college minimum to come in here. And I knew that if half didn't make it, and I'm starting off way behind educationally, that I stand a good chance of being in the 50% fail rate. But I said, I want to try. I went home to Wichita. They were having a powwow. They gave me an honoring dance because I was going to Pensacola the next day. I led the dance, and I drove to Pensacola the next day. And for 18 months, that dance preyed on my mind because I thought there's no way I can go back to this community as a failure. Nobody in this community has an opportunity like I do. I cannot come back and tell them I'm home early because I flunked out. I washed out. I couldn't make it. I can't. And so I was driven with fear of that for 18 months through 4 phases of flight training. And in every one of those phases, I was the number 2 guy. And I never gathered any confidence or complacency. I never thought I was doing as well as my grades indicated. And I'm watching my friends wash out every week, sometimes every day. And every time one of them said goodbye and walked away with a sea bag over his shoulder, I thought, at some point before I get to the end of this, that will be me. And I continued to push. The final 6 months, we went to Pensacola, Florida. I left Pensacola, Florida, and went to Beeville, Texas for advanced jet flight training. I had 6 more months, and if I could just make it, 6 more months, I was done. I got into Beeville, Texas, and I got drunk with a bunch of my buddies. We went to a drive-in, old-fashioned drive-in, because that's where the South Texas girls hung out. We had an inside track because we were going to be hotshot jet fighter pilots. And they immediately went after a carload of girls, and I hung back a little bit. I saw the driver wasn't talking to anybody, but I couldn't get a good look. But I thought I better have a few more drinks. So I did. I rehearsed some stuff that I thought was even better than normal, just deadly stuff. And I walked up. I thought she may just take her clothes off sitting there with this stuff. And I walked up, and she turned and looked at me, and she was good looking, and everything just vacated. And I'm standing there, and she's got a look of expectation. Maybe I'm supposed to say something, and I said to her, the only thing that I could think of was, you have the most beautiful brown eyes I've ever seen. But it was late, and it kind of didn't come out right. It came out like, how she goes, brown eyes. I should have practiced before I went up there. And she looked at me like I just peed on the side of her car, and I turned around and just walked away. I thought, that's it, I'm not going back. I'm standing back there drinking some more, and she went into the restroom, and I got a good look at her. And I'm watching her walk in. She had turquoise shorts on. She had a really cute rear end. She had pretty legs, and I knew she had that beautiful face, those brown eyes. And I had an AA thought. I did not know it was an AA thought. I recognized it 29 years later. But if she's walking in, and I'm thinking, man, I want what she has, and I'm willing to go to any length to get it. And I did. I had a chance encounter with her the next day. I had a buddy with me. She had a girlfriend. And I was scared and nervous, but I was at least sober, and bought her some coffee, and she reluctantly talked to me and finally told me I could call her. Her name is Barbara. And on March the 9th, just passed, we celebrated 54 years together. God help me if she ever decides to admit she made a mistake. February the 25th, 1963 was her 20th birthday, and she pinned a set of gold wings on me. Right over my chest. This good-looking girl. Pinned 2 gold bars on my shoulders. I've come a long way from being an barely 18-year-old Marine private. I'm now a 22-year-old commissioned Marine Corps officer, fighter pilot, and I've done well. And I've got a good career ahead of me. She was instantly pregnant, which I thought was part of my Marine Corps duty. And we had a little boy, and 8 days less than a year later, we had a second little boy. And I got tired of people coming up and going, you guys Catholic? I go, no, we're just horny Protestants. She went home to Texas with these 2 little babies. Year-old and a brand new baby, and I went to Vietnam. We were one of the first jet squadrons into Vietnam. We were flying out of a place called Chu Lai, 50 miles south of Da Nang. It's an all-Marine Corps operation, combat airstrip, very primitive, typical Marine Corps operation, hot, 100, 110 degrees. We lived in the sand. We ate sea rations out of cans. Lived in tents. We had no air conditioning, no nothing, no creature comforts. Our runway was half of what we needed. It was interlocking aluminum matting, but we were all carrier qualified. We used jet assist bottles for takeoff on combat missions. We landed into carrier gear coming back. Everything we did was challenging, very challenging. and we acquitted ourselves extraordinarily well. We performed excellently over there, and I will never again in my life have such an experience to be in the middle of 28 of the finest men and the finest pilots I have ever seen under extreme conditions and perform with them. What an honor, what a privilege, what a blessing to have been one of them. I put in for a regular commission over there. I knew full well the Marine Corps did not give regular commissions. They were very competitive. They didn't give regular commissions to officers who had no college. And I got a regular commission. And I looked at that and I thought, that's what I'm always supposed to do. That's what I expect of me. That's what others expect of me. They expect me to go the extra mile, to go above and beyond, to achieve and to accomplish and to work. They do not expect me to go into a bar in Fargo, North Dakota and become the biggest disgrace and the biggest pariah in all of American commercial aviation history. And there has never been a second, never even been a close second to what I did. I was a publicity nightmare for my airline and for the entire aviation industry. And that destroyed me because I had been the guy in my family who had raised 3 grown kids as a standard bearer for things like duty, honor, country, character, honesty, integrity. And their father had just set a horrendous example and rendered everything I'd ever told or taught them null and void and meaningless based on my own personal example. I was in treatment for a week. Nobody knew the color of my eyes. So ashamed I couldn't look at anybody. By about day 2 or 3, everybody knew who I was because the media had it now. I did not know that until I got there. The media had it. It's on the lead story everywhere, nationally, locally, everywhere. The 3 Northwest pilots. I walked into a week to the day that I entered treatment. They announced on TV I wouldn't go near either one of the 2 TV sets. They announced on TV that I had been terminated by Northwest Airlines, as I should have been. The FAA had issued an emergency revocation of all my flight certificates. That was fair and appropriate. And I'd lost my FAA medical certificate as a result of my alcoholism. I'm now stripped naked bare. I have no aviation credentials whatsoever, and I have no education to fall back on. I think that everything that happened to me was fair and appropriate. Let me tell you what I think the tragedy of this disease is. It didn't just come to me, it came to Barbara. It came to my 3 kids. It came to my friends and my family, and anyone who had a loving relationship with me got to share in the suffering that I brought them. That's the tragedy, not what happens to me. One of the things that I need to go back and catch up on and tell you that I got out of the Marine Corps after 11 and a half years. I finally resigned my commission because I was going to end up spending an entire career away from my kids for 4 to 6 years. 3 weeks after I had resigned, I was in class at Northwest Airlines. Barbara had always wanted a daughter. We had talked about it. We talked about adopting even before we got married. And we had the 2 boys. And I said, let's adopt. She said, okay. It was a heck of a struggle because we had 2 biological kids and we fought hard for 14 months. I mean, we fought hard. And we brought home a little Shipwindon girl. She was 17 days old. She came to my house. Barbara was in heaven. She was the most beautiful little girl I have ever seen. She could not walk past me without me scooping her up and looking in that little face and saying, thank you for being my girl. And she'd say, thanks for being my dad. She was the center of my universe. I love my boys, but my girl was so special. And when she was 17, she ran away from home. And I didn't see that coming, and Barbara didn't see it coming. I don't know if I hadn't been drinking, if I would or wouldn't. See, one of the things that I have as an alcoholic, I used to have these tests, these parameters. I didn't drink every night. I rarely ever drank in the mornings, and I knew all alcoholics did that. And I devised certain tests to see if I was an alcoholic, and I passed them all. And they point out to me when I get into treatment, most normal drinkers don't feel compelled to devise tests to see if they are. Who knew? And I was a happy drunk. I'm not excusing my drinking. I'm not excusing my drinking, but I was a happy drunk. I never beat or abused my wife and kids. As a matter of fact, if something had gone wrong while I was on a trip, car had gotten dented, one of the kids had brought home an F, Barbara would meet me at the door with a drink. You'd think I would pick up on that after a little while, but I didn't. I go, oh, that's so sweet. And I'd down a couple of stingers, and then she'd say, well, there's something we need to talk about. I go, oh, it's okay, we'll deal with it. That little girl could not have been more loved by any family that I can ever imagine. Her brothers loved her to death. She was immediately their little sister. They were 5 and 6. And she ran away from home, and it broke my heart. I had put off being a captain for 2 years because I wanted to be home with her rather than being gone as a junior captain. She was getting ready to graduate. I went to Chicago to take a special written test. On the way home the next morning, I called home. Barbara says, Dawn ran away last night. And I blurted out where to go and who to call and where to look. I was scared. I'm scared to death. My little girl is gone, and I don't know what's happened to her. And 2 hours later, I'm home in Atlanta, and something happened to me on that flight home. I'm not aware of any feelings changing. I'm not aware of any magic transformation. But something happened because when I got off the airplane, I hated her. I hated her worse than I thought I had the capacity to hate anyone or anything. And I told Barbara, I said, I don't care if she dies in the streets. She'll never come back to my house, and I never want her name mentioned in my presence again. I told the rest of the family and our friends. Within 2 days, everything she'd ever touched in that house was gone. There was no physical trace of evidence that she'd ever been there. I went to the bank and I ripped up her adoption papers. I went to an attorney and I gave him $500 and disowned her. And then I tried to annul the adoption and I couldn't. And in this raging torrent of white-hot hatred, in a way that's only insanely amusing, I thought, I don't think Barbara's handling this too much. She probably needs a therapist. And so I got in the yellow pages, and by the luck of the draw, pulled out a PhD family therapist who happened to be a really good one. We saw him twice a month for almost 2 years. And I didn't like talking about my little girl. One time he tried to get me to talk about her, and I made a statement that absolutely portrayed me, one sentence. I said, I'm going to tell you something, doctor. I would rather hate than hurt. He said, you survived a childhood doing that, and if you continue, it'll destroy you. And he was right. In treatment, I looked back. I thought, that's what I've always done. I'm a man. I don't like pain, and pain is not a manly feeling. Anger is. And so I won't risk a relationship anywhere without having anger right there. Because if I think I'm vulnerable, if I think something is coming, I get angry. And that wall comes up, and the pain doesn't penetrate. I'm too busy being angry. And I saw that once I got into treatment. The alcohol quit working for me. I no longer wanted anything to do with the crew members. All I wanted to do was be by myself and drink. I knew where every liquor store was in every city we ever flew into. I knew how long it took me to change clothes in a hotel, get up there, and get back. And I would come back with a quart of booze, and I would lock the door, and I'd turn the TV set. I wouldn't answer the phone if a crew member called. I wouldn't go to the door if they knocked. And I'd sit there and I'd drink. And I don't know about you, but when I mix a drink, it's strong. I don't like it straight, but it's strong. And sometimes I got to gag and choke a little bit to get the first one down. After that, they all go down smooth. But I could no longer get the relief and the soothing, warm glow, that escapism, that I don't care, everything's okay, everything's loose inside of me, it's all right, who cares? I never could recapture that ever again. Because from that moment on, when I drank, there must have been a fire down here, and I'm throwing gas on it, because up comes the hate, the hatred, and the self-pity and the martyrdom, and this anger. It's just like a blazing furnace there, and I throw it on there, and up it comes, and by the time the bottle's empty, I'm just absolutely wrung out and wasted, exhausted emotionally. And I'm experiencing this all. Look what I did for her, and I've got this list of things I did for her, and look how she repaid me. And the next night, I'd do it all over again. All over again, and again, and again, and again. And that's where we were when the arrest took place. I walked into a room in the treatment center somewhere around the first week, and they closed the door. 8 or 10 of us in there, I began to talk about my daughter, and I broke down and cried. I didn't have that anger anymore. It was gone, and I had never cried. I didn't cry at my parents' funerals. I didn't cry. And I broke down and cried because I got hit right in the heart with it. And it's one of the best things that ever happened to me. Oh, I was embarrassed. I was ashamed. The members of the group hugged me, and later I told Barbara, I said, get a hold of Don, let's put the family back together again. And there were no visitors, no phone calls. The staff said, that's such an amazing breakthrough. We'll let that happen if you can make it happen. Some days later, I show up down there in a day room. The two doctors said, could we please come watch? We want to see this. And they were in the room, and I walked in, and there was my daughter. And I hadn't seen her in 2 years. And I thought, God, she's smaller than I remembered. I wish I could find the words to tell you what it felt like for me to walk across that room and put my arms around my little girl and hug her and tell her how much I loved her instead of how much I hated her. And in her arms was a 5-month-old granddaughter that I didn't really know anything about. I didn't even know my daughter's last name. She got married and I didn't know anything about it. I wish I could tell you that that was the beginning of a wonderful promise and everything has been good, but her life today is a mess. It's a mess. Not due to alcohol or drugs that I'm aware of, but she's in bad shape. And I have to allow it to happen because I have a thing called acceptance. I cannot change her. I cannot change her journey. She has it, and all I can do is accept it. I'm on good terms with her. I was telling Stacy, I said, she calls home, says, hi, Daddy, and I just melt in my shoes. I say, hi, sweetie, how are you? I wish it was better. I'll always be sad. I'll always be brokenhearted. I'll always be disappointed. But it is what it is, and my job is to accept it. We did the best we could, and I'm okay with that. I can look in the mirror and be okay with that. She had the best mom that anybody could have ever had, and things just didn't work out well. Suddenly, I began to get word about legal consequences in the treatment center. And I go through 6 of these ever-escalating things about 2 days apart. And every time they take me out of a group and tell me, it stops my heart. It's like they have sucked the air out of the room, and I can't breathe. I didn't know anything about legal consequences. I knew the FAA would react, and they did. I knew Northwest would, but none of the attorneys knew a thing about legal consequences on the day of the arrest. And now I'm hearing about jail time from Minnesota, North Dakota. Minnesota doubles the penalties. North Dakota doubles the penalties. The federal marshals are coming to take me out of the treatment center in handcuffs. And then the 6th time, and every time they do this, it paralyzes me. The only time I thought I would ever be locked up was in Vietnam if I was shot down as a POW. And finally, the 6th time I step outside and there's a doctor, and I thought, oh. We go down to his office. He said, sit down. He said, a federal grand jury has just indicted you. You're looking at 15 years in federal prison, $250,000 fine, and an attorney's coming in Sunday and wants $50,000, which I didn't have. We went broke 30 days after the arrest. I'd grown up with nothing, and now I took Barbara there. We had nothing. He said, I have to ask if you're going to hurt yourself, and I said, no. I went back to my room, and I collapsed. And I don't remember falling, but I remember my head being on the carpet, the side of my head on the carpet, and I'm crying. And I said, God, I can't do this anymore. I can't do it even one more time. Not even one more time. Please, not even one more time. I don't have anything left. Please help me. And I slept that night. I had many life-changing experiences in treatment because I went in there hoping and believing that maybe this might work. And if you're new here and you're having those same questions, I'm here to tell you that it does. Will it work when I leave the treatment center? Will it work when I leave the AA meeting? Will it work on the streets and the sidewalks? Yes, it does, if I do my part. I got out of there and I was immediately in a very heavily publicized 3-week trial. We drew the toughest judge in the Minnesota Federal District. I never got a break anywhere along the way. Not one single break. When there was a chance it could go left or right, it never once, not ever, went the direction I hoped it would go. Not once. I have an amazing story with an attorney that I don't have time to tell you. And I told him, I said, I'll be found guilty, and when I am, it will be okay. I wanted to plead guilty. And he said, it's not a wise move with all the publicity. He told me in treatment, you're going to have to learn to trust and to listen. I said, okay. I said, when I'm found guilty, Peter, it'll be okay. I can't tell you what a 3-week criminal trial is like. There are no words to describe it. Heavily covered by the television. Everywhere I went, a gang of reporters, animals, just descending on me, sticking cameras and microphones in my face, wanting a reaction. And if I saw them when I was walking, and there was no way we could go that they didn't have it covered. And I would mantra the serenity prayer as many times as I could as I approached them, and I could feel something take hold inside. It didn't all go away, but I could feel it reduce. I'm the captain, so everything comes to me first. The jury goes out, the jury comes back. I know what that probably means. I'm standing up. The verdict is guilty. My attorney's he flinches, and I reached over and patted him. I said, "It's okay. It's all right." We come back for the sentencing. Sentencing guidelines were 12 months to 18 months. Those have gone away now. Federal judge was in treatment with me. He said, "I have to tell you about the sentencing." He said, "That's a charade." He said, "When we come through the door, the sentence is set." Other judges around the country have said, "That's so." "Oh, you're going to talk, your attorney will talk, maybe I'll have witnesses." Nothing changes. When they come through the door, the sentence is set. The rest of it is a charade. And I knew that. I knew that. A day and a half before sentencing, my attorney calls me. He says, "I've got bad news." I said, "You've always got bad news. You never never called me and said, 'Hey, Lyle, I got some good news.'" He said, "The judge just notified the other two attorneys and the media that he's going to depart upward from the sentencing guidelines tomorrow, and he can go all the way to 15 years. This judge had strong feelings about this case, and I saw him every day for 3 weeks. And I didn't begrudge him those feelings. I accepted responsibility because this was a horrific betrayal of the public trust, and I never made an excuse for it from day one. He was entitled to those feelings. I told Barbara this is going to be big, and I'm going to be gone a long time, and I think that I'll be led away in handcuffs, and I give her my personal effects. And the judge asked me if I had anything to say, and I was so scared I didn't know as I stood up what I was going to say. And I stood up and I talked about being grateful to be sober. I was grateful for the things that had happened inside my family with my daughter. And I had accepted responsibility for this thing from day one, and I couldn't change anything. Not what happened yesterday, not what happened several months earlier. He announced a sentence on me of 16 months. That blew everyone away. 2 months less under the guidelines. And I thought I knew a miracle had happened that morning, and I thought I'll never know why. He told my attorney a couple of years later in chambers, he said I was going to sentence Lyle to 4 years in prison that morning until he said what he said, and I thought more about him as a human being and about his service in Vietnam, and I came down from the bench. That never happens, and it happened that morning. He then said, "This is a complex case. This was not designed, the first time this law has ever been used, and it was not designed for pilots, and there'll be complex legal issues and appeals." And he said, "I'll let you 3 men remain free until your appeals are exhausted." The other 2 said, "Okay." I said, "No, I'll go to prison now." Because I learned in here that I deal with life on life's terms. You know, this is a first-person story, so you're hearing a lot of I and me, I and me. Everything that I did came from the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous and what I had been taught in a 12-step treatment center and in the AA meetings and from AA people. Everything that I did, every approach that I made, every way that I handled anything came from what I had learned in here. And I knew that I could avoid prison for another year and a half, but I also remembered something that I had heard or read in high school. It said, "A coward dies 1,000 deaths, a brave man only one." And I wasn't going to die 1,000 more deaths. As every night came down and the sun went down, I'm one day closer to something that's coming, and I'm not going to live like that. I said, "I've been convicted, I will go." I was terrified. I've never been to federal prison. I told my kids I was scared, but I said, the reality is I can't come out the back door until I go in the front. I remembered something else that I'd learned in the Marine Corps, that courage is not the absence of fear. It's the ability to continue in the face of it. And that's now my job. So on December the 5th of 1990, 34 years to the day that I entered Marine boot camp, I checked into the Atlanta Federal Prison as inmate 04478-041. Had a lot of experiences in there. I don't talk about them from the podium. Audiences love prison stories. They have nothing to do with my recovery. My recovery has everything to do with how I dealt with prison, the people in it, the situations and the circumstances that I encountered. And I acquitted myself very well in there, thanks to this program and the things that I had learned in there. Inmates would come to me and say, how come they can't get to you? How come this and how come that? And it was all due to this, all due to AA and the way that I know how to implement each of the 12 steps. I got out, I was broke. I made 12 cents an hour in there. The worst thing about that was there was no 401k plan. The judge had put sanctions on me that absolutely made it impossible I'd ever fly again. He closed the door on anything. He put a layer of concrete right over the top of my coffin, on top of what the FAA had done. There was no chance I would never fly again, period. A year after I got out of prison, he lifted those sanctions, and a story that I don't have time to go through here. And that didn't make anything really easy. It just made it possible. The FAA said if you're going to fly again, you'll start all over again, literally from the ground up with a private license, which I'd never had. And I didn't think it was possible. But I thought, okay, I'll stay sober one day at a time. I will go after these 4 licenses one at a time. 10.5 months later, I'd passed all the writtens, and those were difficult things. A lot of work involved. But my parents showed me how to work. Another thing that I owe them. But there's a flying part that comes into play, and I checked into that, and I thought, that's a deal breaker. That's $10,000 to $20,000. I'm back working in the treatment center that had saved my life. Best job I'd had. I'm making $14,000 a year, just barely able to stay alive. And people would say, how can you stay alive on $14,000? I said, hey, I've done the math. That's 56.25 times more than what I made in prison. It's all attitude. Everything is attitude. But I couldn't fly. And I get a notice and a phone call the same day from a pilot in Northwest. He said, I've got a flight school you didn't know about. I want you to come up here and live with me and my family. Go through the flight school free. I'm under 13 conditions of probation. So I go up there, check in with the Minnesota Department of Corrections. I spent 44 days living with that man and his family. I hanged out 14 days, but I never slowed down. I never quit studying. I flew 78 hours in the remaining 30 days. I got 4 licenses back. I had 2 of them by 11:15 one morning. And I'm not so sure. I don't think that's ever been done before. I don't know, but and when I'm not night flying, I'm in an AA meeting up there. Why? Because that's what's given me back my life. That's where I belong. That's where I go. I came home with those 4 licenses. But I'm never going to fly on American soil. Everybody knows my name, and they know about the Northwest Flight 650 incident. There's no chance I'm ever going to fly on American soil. A month later, the licenses physically arrived in the mail, and within an hour, I got a phone call from the head of the pilot union at Northwest. A grievance had been automatically filed because it was a termination. I had not activated the grievance because I thought Northwest was justified in terminating me. This man said, this is the best phone call I've ever made, because he said 3 hours ago, John Dasberg, President and CEO of Northwest Airlines, made a personal decision to bring you back and put you into full flight status at Northwest. Not quite 4 years after this event. I thought about that. I thought that is so far beyond the level of extraordinary courage, I don't know how to describe it. And then the second thought hit me. He is gambling his career on mine. Based on the publicity that I had, if I go back and relapse, the board of directors will oust him so quickly he will not have time to pack his desk. All I have to do is relapse or have a flying incident. Why would he take such a risk? He's risking his career on mine. And I had that discussion with him when I went back and met him and got to know him pretty well. And he never gave me a really good answer. He just laughed and said, well, we talked about that a lot. Add to that the fact that his father was an alcoholic who couldn't stay sober. And he brought me back and gambled on me. I don't know why. I went back never to be a captain again, but I was happy with that. I'm going to get to fly. At least I'm going to get something in the way of a retirement for Barbara. And I went back. Northwest now had a program for pilots, and I'm part of that program. And I dedicated myself 200% to making sure that John Dasberg never had an ounce of regret about bringing me back. I always had a good reputation as an aviator. That was always there. But I wanted to be the best employee on that entire property, and I strove to do exactly that, and I know I did a good job. As I was coming up on my final year at Northwest, I was speaking at United Airlines, so I got a phone call late at night, woke me up. Same pilot, and he said, John Dasberg has just changed your back-to-work agreement. He knows you're coming up on your last year at Northwest, and he thinks you ought to spend it as a 747 captain. I laid there, and I thought nothing would ever surpass my return to Northwest. Nothing could ever be greater than that. And I had this picture of a God up there in the dark, looking down and smiling and winking at me and saying, every time you think I've used my miracles up, I can show you one more. And I went back and I checked out, and I spent my last year at Northwest as a 747 captain. Fully restored, fully trusted. We never recovered all of the material losses, but I wouldn't trade that for what I've got today. Fully trusted, given back that golden thing that we all lose. That word trustworthy. I was now worthy of trust. And he let me fly a mega $1 million airplane with 18 flight attendants and 400 passengers all over the world. I retired honorably September of 1998 at the then mandatory age of 60. It's now 65. Now I knew I'd done a good job. And within about 2 days, my attorney called me. This is 8 years after the trial. He said, I just had a phone call from Judge Rosenbaum, who's now Chief Judge of the Minnesota Federal District. He says in 16 years on the federal bench, he has never supported a petition for pardon, which I had never considered. But he said he'll support yours if you want to make the attempt. He wrote a 3-page affidavit that to this very day I cannot read all the way through without tearing up. This is written by the man who tried me, sentenced me, and sent me to prison. And it's an extraordinarily powerful, chokingly emotional document that he writes about me. That document went in with a whole package of other stuff. 2 years later, I came walking into 8 phone messages telling me I had just received a presidential pardon. I'd rather have that than the Powerball lottery. It's amazing. The chances are almost impossible of getting a presidential pardon, and I got one. Day 2 of treatment, I'm in an outside AA meeting, and I hear him read the promises, which we often do at these events. And I perked up a little bit until they got to that part, said, no matter how far down the scale we have gone, we'll see our experience can benefit others. And I thought, no, not this time. It may happen for her and it may happen for him, but it can't happen for me. And I'm telling you as I close this talk that you haven't heard 30%, maybe 30% of the entire story. I have gotten to live out more miracles than anyone I know. And so will you if you stay with us. Your miracles will be different than mine, but they will be there. Let me close with something that I like because it kind of embraces the way I see things. It simply says this, I do not wish you joys without a sorrow, nor endless day without the healing dark, nor brilliant sun without the restful shadow, nor tides that never turn against your bark. I wish you strength, faith, and love, and wisdom, and goods, gold enough to help some needy one. I wish you songs, but also blessed silence, and God's sweet peace when every day is done. My Comanche name is Yetzethanap, but you know me as Lyle, and I'm an alcoholic. I thank you for your company this evening and for my sobriety. Thank you.
I think we got a great talk going on here. Thanks for watching the channel. Taper Dave here. Just curious, do you think this is better than Zoom? Okay, this is how I prepare my drone for launching. I like to do it inside the cab of my truck so I'm not standing outside in the weather. To install the joysticks for control, up and down, right and left, powered on. I have an Android phone that I use to connect it to the drone with. And it's actually controlled through the iPhone, through an app. Oops, wrong way. It's actually controlled through the iPhone, or through this Android phone, through the app. It's actually controlled through the Android phone, through an app, and you connect it through this short connection right here.
Remote control connected.
Remote control's connected. So I pull out the drone. I have to extend the legs. Long legs extended first, then the short legs. Remove the gimbal protector. Set that aside, then power it on one short burst, then one long burst. I lay it down. So I have to go to calibrate. So the drone's not connected yet. It shows you here as this drone gets disconnected, even though the remote's powered on. So the drone has to establish it's connected. So I go into the app to calibration mode. First I'll calibrate the remote controller. Start calibration. Out, in, oop, out, in, up, down, and then this little wheel is to control the gimbal. So it's calibrated. Go to gimbal calibration, start calibration, and then it calibrates the gimbal. And if that shows up, the gimbal's moving all over the place. Changes, you can see it on the video. And I'm calibrated to take off. It's acquired 7 satellites at the moment. There are 26 satellites up in the sky, which it has to acquire before you can take off. So it's connected. It's got enough satellites. This is white. I can go to press this little arrow button, swipe right to take off, and it would start the motors if I slid this to the right. But I'll wait till I get outside. Don't want to do it inside.